In recent months, I've been subjected to severe and unacceptable pressure, including threats to disseminate false allegations of domestic abuse unless financial demands were met.
So, two absolutely huge storylines in the UFC just completely flipped the script, and honestly, these developments could change everything we thought we knew about what's coming next. Alex Pereira basically just slammed the door shut on all those White House fight rumors that had everyone going crazy, and when I say shut it down, I mean he made it crystal clear that conversation is over. But that's not even the wildest part, because while this is going down, Ilia Topuria drops some statements that have people seriously questioning what his entire future looks like in this sport. These weren't subtle hints either. We're talking about direct words that left fans wondering if everything they expected is about to change. Now, when it comes to this whole mess that's developing, Ariel Helwani, who usually keeps things pretty balanced, stepped up and said he totally gets it if Ilia needs to take time away from fighting, considering everything happening in his world right now. Helwani called the situation heartbreaking, said his heart goes out to everyone in Topuria's circle during what's clearly a rough period, and emphasized that the smartest thing anyone can do is sit back and let this play out naturally instead of rushing into any major moves.
You can understand even more so why he would want to step away and not focus on fighting or defending his title, because obviously there's a lot going on. It's extremely sad. It's I feel for everyone involved. I feel for his family. I feel for his kids. It's
The timeline is anybody's guess at this point, because Ilia came forward and admitted he's dealing with some heavy personal stuff right now, and he's being completely honest that there's no way to predict when he'll step back into competition. He explained that once he gets these personal issues completely sorted out and everything is handled the right way, he definitely wants to return to the octagon as fast as possible, because this sport is still everything to him and fighting remains his life's work. But right now, in this exact moment, his complete attention has to be on sorting out what's happening away from the cameras with his family and personal matters, and you really have to admire someone being that real about where their priorities need to be, especially when it means potentially missing out on huge championship fights. What people really need to hear, what everyone keeps asking about, is for him to spell out his situation clearly instead of letting people fill in the blanks with their own theories.
the first quarter that you'll fight in January. When would you like to fight? When you feel it's time to return? Well, Ilia says, as I've communicated, I'm going through some personal problems. I do not have an exact date when everything will be fixed. I hope that as soon as possible.
When the moment is right, I'll be ready to compete again. That's exactly what Ilia said to make his stance clear. But here's the key thing everyone needs to grasp. He went out of his way to emphasize that stepping back from competition right now has absolutely nothing to do with losing his drive or suddenly being scared of whoever he might face next. This isn't about a champion getting nervous or starting to doubt his abilities, not even close. This is about handling what really matters in life, and that means his family and whatever personal crisis requires his full attention right now. He drives this point home really hard, saying the fighting game will always be waiting for him. The competition isn't disappearing, but his family circumstances and personal emergencies have to take priority at this moment. When those urgent matters are completely resolved and put to bed, that's when he's planning his comeback. And not just any comeback, but coming back totally locked in, mentally sharp, and prepared to compete at that elite championship level fans know him for, and ready to put on the kind of crushing performances that earned him the belt originally.
Ilia says, as I've communicated, I'm going through some personal problems. I do not have an exact date when everything will be fixed. I hope that as soon as possible, as soon as it is solved, I will be ready to go back. In the octagon, I prioritize at this time the welfare of my family, of my children, my own. So as soon as everything is solved, I will be back to the octagon to give it the show that everyone deserves.
What makes this even more fascinating from a business perspective is that Helwani suggests this whole thing might eventually push the UFC into making some tough decisions if everything drags on way longer than expected. While he doesn't think anything dramatic will happen right away like in January or February, he does float something pretty major. If Ilia ends up on the shelf deep into next year, we're talking potentially half a year or more of no activity. The organization might seriously look at promoting that interim championship to the full legitimate title. That's massive, because it basically means taking the belt away from Ilia without actually going through the process of stripping him. Helwani also points out something really smart about how guys like Evlov and other contenders aren't losing sleep over this whole uncertainty, and the reason is simple. They know that championship situations in mixed martial arts can completely flip upside down in a heartbeat, like literally from one fighter's decision, one unexpected injury, one scheduling conflict, and suddenly everything everyone thought they knew about who fights next gets thrown out the window. So these fighters are keeping themselves in peak condition and just watching to see how everything shakes out. The big question hanging over everyone's head: at what point does the UFC say enough is enough and move forward without Ilia if this situation never gets resolved?
Make that interim belt the actual belt if he's not going to come back anytime soon. I don't think that they're going to be forced to do that for the January event. We'll see what kind of timeline he's on, how long this is going to play out. But if it's by next summer, perhaps they make that call. And perhaps that's why a guy like Armin doesn't seem too bothered by what's going on. These things can play out in many different ways, and you're on the outside and then you're on the inside, and everything changes in an instant.
At the same time, Chael Sonnen stepped in with his own take on this situation, claiming that those original headlines that everyone freaked out about regarding Ilia were actually pretty deceptive and didn't give people the real picture. He spent time breaking down how, after he actually went through the complete details of what was reported and looked beyond the clickbait headlines, there wasn't any concrete evidence that Ilia Topuria was giving up the championship or officially walking away from his position as featherweight king. Based on Chael's analysis of what actually happened, when you read the reports word for word, nothing suggested that the UFC had formally accepted any kind of title relinquishment from Ilia, or that contenders like Giga Chikadze and Paddy Pimblett were suddenly getting bumped up to undisputed title fights. It was just a classic case of rumors and wild speculation getting way out in front of what was actually happening on the ground, which is pretty typical in MMA news cycles when something big starts trending.
My belief through the headlines is that Ilia was walking away from the UFC championship belt, thus elevating Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett to undisputed title. Now, once I dug into this, I can't quite recall why I thought it in the first place. I mean, once I dug into it, there was nothing in the article that said that Paddy and Justin was going to be undisputed, or that the UFC was accepting, or that Ilia was surrendering a belt back.
Chael went further with his analysis, mentioning something really interesting about where the sport stands overall right now. He made the point that while a potential fight like Ilia against Islam Makhachev might not seem like this absolutely elotely super fight to people who don't follow MMA closely, the truth is that the sport really doesn't have tons of those massive crossover fights available at the moment that grab mainstream headlines. He explained that die-hard fans are completely invested in the sport and love following fighters through their entire careers. But when you look at fights that appeal to casual sports fans, there are seriously few marquee matchups that break through to general sports coverage, which is exactly why concepts like John Jones fighting Alex Pereira sound so incredibly exciting and create so much conversation by comparison. Those are the rare fights that reach beyond just MMA audiences and get people who normally watch football or basketball to pay attention.
The story is that this made headlines for something that we were already told a couple of weeks ago, and there is no escalation from that, meaning Ilia Topuria is not vanquishing or having stripped from him the title. And actually, all of these articles going around, all of these stories you're going around, you're hearing about Ilia Topuria have no direct tying to Paddy the Baddy and Justin Gaethje. I get where this is confusing, and I even asked Daniel that. I said, hey man, what am I missing?
Building on his earlier points, Chael provided even more background to support his position, explaining that once he actually took time to read through the complete articles thoroughly rather than just seeing the headlines, it became totally obvious that the headlines were spinning the story, manufacturing drama that wasn't actually there in reality. According to how Chael interpreted what went down, Ilia eventually spoke publicly about his reasoning, saying that staying completely quiet about these accusations would only let false stories grow and multiply across social platforms and MMA discussion boards. Ilia argued that he decided to address things head-on because he knows accusations are going to keep coming no matter what approach he takes. and he refused to let lies and distorted versions of what really happened spread without any pushback, while he stayed silent and allowed other people to shape how the public sees his situation.
So I start reading these articles. I start going through them all. I'm going, man, these headlines are very misleading. Let me get to the bottom of it. And Ilia does at some point make that statement, which is, I knew that this was going to come out. I thought staying quiet was a way to deal with it. But I've now learned when you're quiet in the world of PR, it gives fuel to flames of false narratives. So I'm going to come out and I'm going to let you know that I am expecting sooner or later an accusation to be made about domestic violence.
Expanding on this point and getting into more detail about the current landscape, Chael broke down how while a matchup like Ilia versus Islam might not look like this earth-shattering mega fight on paper to mainstream audiences, the reality, when you examine where the UFC is right now, is that the promotion genuinely lacks those massive blockbuster attractions at the moment that pull in millions of viewers who don't usually watch fighting. He stressed that hardcore fans are absolutely passionate about the product they're emotionally invested in watching fighters grow and develop over years, but when you step back and consider mainstream crossover potential, there are genuinely limited superstar matchups available that generate coverage on ESPN's SportsCenter, which is precisely why ideas like John Jones versus Alex Pereira immediately sound so appealing and create so much buzz in comparison. Those are the extremely rare fights that transcend mixed martial arts and convince people who typically watch other sports to tune in and see what happens.
I want to get Ilia and Islam, and I get that that's not a huge fight. I get it, but there's not a lot of huge fights out there. That's the other part that's really hard to swallow. Like, we've got a sport and a product that we really like, and it comes to us in a beautiful way, and we're along for the ride. But there's not a lot of really big matches out there. This Jones and Pierre business sounds like a really great idea.
On another front, YouTuber MMA Guru threw her hat into the ring with thoughts on what's developing around Ilia's personal circumstances. Guru believes that what Ilia is dealing with is incredibly serious from both legal and personal angles, and very likely to completely dominate his fighting career for months ahead, potentially much longer than people expect. She explained that while Ilia has publicly rejected the accusations against him and insists that he's being extorted with evidence that he plans to present in court to demonstrate his innocence, the fact that abuse allegations and a child are involved in this makes everything infinitely more complex than your typical legal disagreement. Even if he's completely truthful and the accusations prove to be baseless, she pointed out that court battles like this, especially those involving family disputes and children, almost never get resolved quickly through the legal system. This means that the coming months, at the very least, are probably going to be incredibly chaotic and stressful, both personally for him and his loved ones, and professionally for his championship status and public reputation.
Ilia Topuria announced that he's going to be taking some time away from the fight game to deal with some personal issues, and no one really knew the full extent of those personal issues, but now we do. Ilia Topuria has released a statement to Twitter, and it's not looking good for Ilia Topuria whatsoever. This is going to be a rough next couple of months, to say the least. I don't know how long this situation's going to go on for, but basically the gist of it is, before we read the entire thing, there's abuse allegations being made against Ilia Topuria. Of course, there's a child involved in the split between him and his partner, so that's going to come into play as well when it comes to custody and a custody battle going down. He says he's being blackmailed and it's all a lie, and he's got evidence and documents to support this that he's going to be submitting to the court. So if that's true, this should be over reasonably quickly, but we know how these things get dragged out.
The YouTuber MMA Guru came back to emphasize that what's happening around Ilia is genuinely concerning and might totally eclipse his fighting career for a significant period. While he's openly denying what he's accused of and says he's being blackmailed and has proof to back up his claims, the fact that abuse allegations and a child are part of this makes the whole situation incredibly messy from every possible angle: legal, personal, and public image. She stressed legal fights like this, especially ones involving family court and accusations of this type, almost never wrap up quickly through official channels, which means the next several months are very likely going to be extremely difficult for Ilia, both personally as he handles his family crisis, professionally as the UFC and fight fans wait to see what develops with his championship and future.
Through it, I'm going to try and be objective here based on the information we have. I kind of knew this was the situation when Ilia first announced that he was going to be stepping away. I'll mention that at some point in this video. Bryce Mitchell has immediately weighed in on the situation aggressively, had a lot of harsh words for Ilia Topuria. Early doors on the whole situation, but Bryce Mitchell has massively condemned Ilia Topuria and gone after him, and he's angling. I guess he's pushing now for a fight with Alejandro Topuria and said he's down to fight him. They're both in the same weight class now at bantamweight, so...
Ilia also put out his own statement explaining that he's temporarily pausing his title defenses, and he really drove home why he made this choice. He laid out that when your personal character, your family's safety, and your entire reputation are on the line, you absolutely have to deal with the situation head-on and correctly, not try to balance it while you're in training camp, preparing for fights. He stated very directly that he will completely cooperate with whatever legal proceedings come next, regardless of what that requires and how long it takes. And he's totally certain that the real truth will emerge when everything gets properly investigated by the right authorities and court systems.
Ilia Topuria's official statement, he comes out with this, gets ahead of the stories, gets ahead of the news before they break it down or before we randomly find out about it as they're going through the court situation. And this is it. Over the past several weeks, I have made the difficult decision to temporarily step away from defending my title. This was not a decision I took lightly. However, when circumstances arise that threaten your personal integrity, your family, and your reputation, there comes a point where you must address them directly.
MMA Guru wrapped up her analysis by noting that Bryce Mitchell's emotional response to what Ilia is going through really demonstrates just how heated this whole situation has gotten within the fighting community and among athletes who personally know him. She observed that while some of the reactions you see online come from genuine worry for Ilia and his family's well-being, other responses are obviously just driven by the drama itself and people wanting to insert themselves into the discussion. She believes that the online chaos surrounding Ilia and his personal troubles is very likely to keep building and changing until more solid facts come out through legal channels or until Ilia himself shares more details about what's really going on.
This is a horrible situation. Bryce Mitchell immediately weighed in. And he's talking mad shit about Ilia Topuria. Let's let it play.
Well, I got something for you, bitch. It's called the Wife Beater Special. That's right. I got my wife beater on for Ilia Topuria. That bitch puts his hands on a woman. You know, I grew up without a dad. You know, never seen my dad, never will see my dad. And you know what? I'd rather not see my dad than have my dad there beating on my mom. Let me tell you something, what that'll get you killed around these parts, son.
Bryce is going off. Bryce is right in at the deep end. Going off on Ilia Topuria. And people are pulling the MMA Guru special and posting pictures of him and John Jones. But this is all Bryce Mitchell needed to see. Okay? And off he goes.
Speaking of Ilia Topuria, his mother and his longtime trainer both stepped forward publicly and voiced strong support for him, offering encouragement and backing him up during this incredibly challenging ongoing situation that's unfolding in his private life.
Topuria's mother wrote, "The best son, the most humane person I know. Only the Lord knows how many people's futures depend on you and how hard you work for them. Everything will be fine, and most importantly, no one can take your peace away. May God bless you, my child." Topuria's aunt said, "Love, Ilia. First of all, you are big, kind, and have a loving heart, aunt." Topuria's longtime coach, Javi Clement, said, "Always with you, brother."
In the same vein, Sean O'Malley shared his thoughts and showed real compassion for what Ilia is going through, pointing out how unbelievably hard it must be to deal with these kinds of serious personal and legal problems, while you're supposed to be getting mentally and physically ready for a championship bout. He highlighted that bringing children into any personal conflict makes it exponentially more challenging and emotionally exhausting to handle, and he called the entire set of circumstances genuinely awful for Ilia, both as an athlete and as a human being. Sean O'Malley said it straight up. "I genuinely feel terrible for him because that's really rough when you're dealing with that kind of serious personal chaos and legal mess. You definitely don't want to be in fight camp at the same time trying to get your body and mind ready for war." I really feel bad for him having to navigate this, and when you throw kids into the mix of any personal drama, that's what makes it so incredibly difficult to handle emotionally. It's really unfortunate for him, and I hope everything works out. In totally different news, Ilia Topuria also made sure to give props to Paddy Pimblett as a skilled and exciting fighter in competition, publicly acknowledging that while they might have their issues and conflict on social platforms, he still recognizes Paddy's abilities as an athlete. He mentioned that Paddy made what he considers a bad choice with a post about Georgia that went too far, but Ilia stressed that everyone learns and improves from their mistakes, and he's not going to hold grudges forever. Ilia also shared that he sees Paddy as someone who on a personal human level knows what it's like to handle family troubles and personal struggles outside of fighting. Ilia Topuria made it clear Paddy Pimblett is a skilled fighter when you see him perform regardless of our personal issues and whatever problems we have on social media. I always say that Paddy seems like a really entertaining person who's performed his role excellently inside the cage. He messed up with that post he made about Georgia, but we all learn from our mistakes as people. I see him as someone who deep down gets family issues and what that's like to go through. Switching to another viewpoint, YouTuber Bad Takes also shared his perspective on this discussion in a conversation with Josh Thompson, focusing specifically on Ilia's circumstances and calling it extremely serious with real legal consequences. He said he completely supports allowing the legal process to run its course properly and letting everything play out fully before anyone makes final decisions. He emphasized strongly that the truth of what occurred should be decided by courts and the legal system, not by social media rumors, quick judgments, and that it's absolutely essential for everyone to avoid jumping to conclusions or assuming guilt or innocence until real evidence surfaces and gets examined correctly by officials.
In recent months, I have been subjected to severe and unacceptable pressure, including threats to disseminate false allegations of domestic abuse unless financial demands were met. These allegations are entirely unfounded. The truth of the matter is not an opinion. It is a matter of evidence. So basically saying, and he's not overtly saying it's his wife, but it has to be. He's basically saying, I am being told that they're going to tell the world I hit her unless I pay them money. And so now it's a very dicey situation.
I want to know where he's going to get the evidence to prove he didn't do it. That's the only thing. And look, and I'm on his side in this situation until otherwise proven that he's guilty. And I'm going to always go, and that's just kind of my letter of the law. Is like, let's see how the court plays out. Let's see exactly what evidence comes to fruition. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, which I do all the time. But in this situation, this is very serious.
Let me know what you think about all this down in the comments, because I'm really curious about your take on everything. What's your reaction to Alex Pereira confirming that the White House fight is now completely dead and not going to happen? Does that shift how you see his next steps in the UFC and what direction he should go? And on the other side, with Alex looking solid and established at the top of his weight class, Ilia Topuria's path forward suddenly seems way more complicated and uncertain after his public statements and all the serious allegations surrounding his personal life. Are we witnessing one fighter lock down his position and secure his spot in MMA history, while another fighter's rise gets completely derailed at what should be the highlight of his career? Or is this just another wild turn in the never-ending drama of MMA business and politics that we've all come to expect? Share your thoughts on where this all leads, what you think comes next, and make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for all the latest fight updates, immediate coverage of breaking news, and detailed analysis of everything happening in the world of mixed martial arts.